Well, greetings again, my friends. It's time for the fourth part of the One Nation Under God series of learning videos. And we're going to be looking at what's probably the most talked about part of our United States constitutional freedoms, and that is going to be the Second Amendment. It is worded as follows. Very simple, short. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, it shall be the right of the people to keep and bear arms, which shall not be infringed. So let's do a real quick language lesson in case there is someone out there who doesn't understand some of the terms in there. A militia is a military force that is formed and composed of ordinary citizens, rather than being part of a country's standard armed forces. Such may activate in an emergency to defend the countries from enemies, whether those enemies are originated in some foreign country or are they based domestically inside the country itself. To keep means to be allowed to retain possession of, to have, to be able to own. Bear means you're allowed to move from one place to another while carrying or holding something, whatever that thing is. Arms, in this case, doesn't mean what's attached to the sides of your body. Arms means instruments or weapons which could be used for either defense or, if necessary, offense. And we talked about this one in the other about freedom of speech. Infringed means to violate that, to restrict it, to prevent it, or even to cancel it out, invalidate it. That this particular amendment, it will not be infringed. The founding fathers placed this near the top of the list. It's number 2, the Second Amendment. Because unlike many modern citizens, they actually understood what constitutes concepts such as fascism and tyranny, and they never wanted any forces evilly bent on destroying this constitutional republic to have an easy shot at doing so. Matter of fact, there's actually many countries that have completely disliked the United States immensely over the course of the 250 years of existence, that have had some of their military planners, their strategists, state to the effect some kind of statement that said that something that held them back from attempting a full-scale invasion of the continental United States is that a high percentage of the citizens were armed, that they had their own weapons, and they were also well aware from things like the world wars and all that Americans tended to excel at something like guerrilla warfare, especially when the things that they held dear were being threatened. Yes, those who would use firearms to wantonly just go and murder somebody else, they should have their ability to access guns restricted. That's called accountability. That's called consequences for the actions they took. And they should have faced the appropriate things for such criminal behavior. But law-abiding owners who use them as intended, whether that's for acquiring food, whether that's for defending their family from threats, workers of evil, when no other option exists in the allotted time, they should not be punished because, well, this lawbreaker over here chose of their own accord to do so. It should be a restriction on the ones who are doing it right because this person chose to do wrong. The person who should bear the punishment and the consequence is the one who made the willing choice to do evil with something that has no brain of its own. Only the brain of the person who chooses to use it for good or evil, for aggression or for defense. Now, this is probably going to ruffle some feathers here, and I know it has simply because of talking about it physically face to face with other Christians before, but turning to the biblical side, many, even in the church, cling to that parroted verse from Matthew 26:51 and 52, where, Peter, he whips out his sword, he cuts off the ear to the servant of the high priest, whether it was a servant or it's one of their temple guardsmen, but he cuts off the ear to the servant of the high priest, and Jesus stopped him, griped at him for doing it, and told him, "Put up your sword, for those who live by the sword shall die by it." Yet, then they don't look any further. And they use that to say, oh yeah, Jesus condemns all forms of weapon ownership and usage thereof. But if you go with just that verse, anyway, there are some logical holes in it. One, okay, Jesus was God. He had already on many times shown that he could see right through somebody's life, like the woman at the well. He saw, oh yeah, well, you were right to say that, you have no husband because you've had this many, and the one you're with now is not your husband, to the point of like Matthew 24, where he was telling about future events that were going to happen way down the line. He saw it all. But Peter had a sword. He actually had one that he could draw. When you draw your sword, what does that mean? You've got it like a ring, a sheath, you've got it tucked into your belt. It's somewhere right on hand. Whether it's open or it's concealed, it's right there on hand so that you can draw it. Which means, guess what? Jesus already knew that he was packing heat. So if he just said, no, you can't have it, why did he make Peter get rid of it? Why did he make him not allowed to have it? That's based off of that particular verse. And B, he told Peter to do what with it? Did he say, get rid of the sword? Go throw that away? You should never have something like that? No, he told Peter to put up your sword. Not get rid of. Put it away. Sheathe it. Holster it, as we might say. Reading in the more detailed account of the time of the Last Supper through the arrest of Jesus, which is scriptural and can be found in Luke chapter 22, you're going to find Jesus there. He's chatting with the disciples, talking about various different things. And the first, because, that's who the disciples were. They were the first Christians, despite the fact the actual term was not applied until Acts 11. But they were the first. They were the ones who would begin the movement. That the time was coming where they were going to end up needing, that he was going to be leaving them, and they were going to end up needing that if they, had a cloak, they were going to need, and but they had no sword, no weapon, they were going to need to sell their cloak and go buy one. Go buy a sword for defense. Depending on the translation you actually read that you own, it might say either that at that point in time, after Jesus said, hey, you may need to go sell your cloak and buy a sword, that a couple of the disciples, or some few of them, pulled out a sword right there and showed Jesus that, hey, guess what? We're packing. We're already packing. And Jesus, he only said one thing. He said, that's enough. Okay, so picture the disciples. They were ostensibly what? Not counting the fact that Judas betrayed, they were a group of 12. Okay, so we know what? A couple is 2. There are 2 of them. Some few, we're talking about a group of 12, so possibly 3, maybe 4 of them, so no more than a third of the disciples, happened to have a sword already owned and on their person. Thus, is it unreasonable to see that there is no issue biblically with us owning arms. In fact, because those of evil would be trying to destroy Christians by any means they could, they were approved for defense, both by God and the godly thought-based Constitution. It's not just, oh, well, it's my constitutional right. No, it's also actually a godly right. However, like I said, somewhere between 2 and 4. So guess what? Group of 12. Not everybody is required to own. As we would say now, not everyone's required to bear arms. It says it's your right, but that doesn't mean you have to. And if you desire not to own one, not to use one, not to know anything about it, you prefer not to have anything to do with arms, well, guess what? You're here in America. That's your personal choice. You have the freedom. If you don't want nothing to do with them, you don't have to. That doesn't negate the right of others who are possessing them legally and only using them for what is good and right. That doesn't negate their rights. The right of each person means you can choose to do that. But you can't cancel everybody else's ability to do it. Nor, and I would say this too would be indicated, nor should you waste every last dime you have on getting more and more and more and more guns or arms or whatever, because that kind of obsession can, in and of itself, become an idol. And we know that would be wrong also. There are a lot better things to spend money on than just constantly getting more and more and more weaponry. The issue that got Peter chewed out by Jesus, because this is important so you understand the biblical standpoint, the reason that Peter got chewed out by Jesus was the fact that when they came to arrest Jesus, they were telling him or saying, okay, like a police officer reaching out their hand to take the convicted person or the guilty party by the arm to place them under arrest. Okay, they weren't acting with violence at that time. They came forward, they reached out to take possession of the person they were supposed to by what they were ordered to do. And in that very instant, Peter's his best, his only reaction to the situation was attack. He could have actually challenged them. There was actually, in the actions that they were performing, there were several violations of the laws that the priest said, oh yeah, people need to obey this, because some of them were not like law, like Mosaic, the Ten Commandments, the Deuteronomy stuff. Some of them were what the people assumed were, oh yeah, these came from God because the priest said this, and they were like a priestly tradition or a priestly interpretation of something. But since the priest said it must have come from God, it was treated like a law. But there were several violations of even those that the priest's henchmen were guilty of. He could have spoke up and said, hey, you can't do this. You know this is wrong, because he could have done that. Not to mention that we're talking Peter, one of the people that's walking around, going everywhere, with listening to Jesus teach, hearing what he had to say. He should have honestly remembered that Jesus taught about this scenario they were now facing was going to happen and how it was supposed to play out. But instead, what did he do? He reacted straight jumping to violence when other options were available. That's what's meant by living by the sword. Whether you're talking a sword, a gun, even your fist. Some people are some pretty skilled martial artists. If violence is your mindset, and the best way to deal with any offense or deal with opinions you don't like or things you don't want people doing or saying is to jump into using some type of violence, no attempts at peacemaking. Violence is your lifestyle, and that's what you go to. That's living by the sword. And that's what Jesus opposed there. It would not have mattered if it was a sword, if what he pulled out was just a knife, if he had a bow and arrow, if he even had a gun. You could, back then they didn't invent them yet, but wouldn't have mattered what he had pulled out. It was the fact that violence was Peter's go-to response in that particular situation. Ownership of weapons that are used properly and responsibly was just fine for the proper reasons. And before I leave on the end of this message, I'm going to leave you with a vital scriptural example. This is from Nehemiah 4. Now, if you know the book of Nehemiah, this is post-Babylonian exile. The exiles had returned. They were trying to rebuild their area there in Israel, trying to rebuild Jerusalem first and build up the walls to have a defensible city. But there were a lot of enemies who disliked them, who were out there harassing them, trying to stop them, trying to kill them. And in Nehemiah chapter 4, verses 11 through 14, here's what you hear there. Our enemies said, they, referring to the children of Israel, they will not know or see until we come among them and kill them and put a stop to their work. When those who lived near them came and told us 10 times, hey, they will come up against you from every place that you may turn. I then stationed men in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall, the exposed places, and stationed the people of families with their swords, with their spears, and their bows. When I saw their fear, I rose. I spoke to the nobles and to the rest of the people. Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight for your brothers, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. Self-defense. Defense of themselves, defense against an enemy who was bent on destroying them or killing them, harming them. And it's right there. It's acceptable in those cases. It was acceptable, let's go hunt them down and kill them before they're ready. No, that wasn't acceptable. That wasn't what was said. We're going to be prepared and we're going to be ready to defend ourselves. Not aggression, not go out and get rid of the people who hate us, so we're going to hate them back and get them first. No, that was not said. It was, let us be ready to defend everything that we love, our family, our belongings. Let us protect that. So obviously, right there, we're looking at the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, and you can see that it is directly supported as a godly principle. The very thing that the founding fathers were using as guides to decide what should be in there to try to make a country based off of ethics. And those who, when they said religion, they meant Christianity, even though, yes, because Christianity says you don't have to accept us. You can choose that you don't want to live what we're telling you. That's your choice in the end. We're just here to tell you what's good and right. So indeed, this one also, Second Amendment shows godly influence. Right there. That's number 2. Next message, we'll get into number 3 and talk about it. Just 2 more. Like I said, we're just doing the first 4, but by then it should be pretty obvious how, look, this matches up. This matches up. The principle here is the same principle there. Or at least assuming people actually want to hear it. If you only want to hear what tickles your ears, well, that's also, again, your choice. but I hope you can hear and I hope you can learn. So God bless y'all and have a wonderful day.